We are live. Stay tuned, stay tuned, stay tuned. I'm here with the coach, John Brent. I got you on mute, my friend.
See, I just talked about that mute. I'm here with Ian Griffin, the vet. See?
Oh, my goodness. So, Coach, we got a good guest today. And so I'm going to introduce Ira Baldwin, a guy that I got to meet at Fort Riley, Kansas. And we both served in the same brigade together in the 1st Sustainment Brigade as it went through its transition from a DISCOM to a 1st Sustainment Brigade. There was a transitional time in the Army we had then. And I was aspiring to be a battalion sergeant major out of there, and that's all I could see in my eyes. But a great officer and a great American. So, Ira, I'm going to throw it over to you and let us tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'll put a picture up here in a minute.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ira Baldwin. I am a retired Army officer. I served 30 years in the Army, locations all around the world. I've enjoyed my career. And throughout my 30-year career, I've had opportunity to meet great people, made history. And I tell you, it's just one thing about being an American. We do great, wonderful things as Americans. I love this nation. I love our Army. I love our military in general. I love all Americans.
Well, it's good to have you on here, Ira. Go ahead, Coach.
That's great. Man, that's awesome. I love to hear that. Great Americans. Great Americans.
So, Ira, let's throw this picture up here and tell us a little bit about it.
That is a picture of a World War II veteran. His book is entitled Hell's Guest. So if you're down in the Alabama area, Mobile, Alabama, around the USS Alabama Memorial, Battleship Memorial, you will see him. This is his book, Hell's Guest. I don't know if you can see it. Pictured here is he's a survivor of the Bataan Death March. Again, his book is Hell's Guest. That's Mr. Glenn D. Frazier. And I suggest you get the book. It's a great book that teaches about survival, struggle, and the ability to bounce back like a phoenix from the ashes to become successful, and forgiveness of past transgressions. Because at a time in his life, he went through bouts of alcoholism, divorces, business failures, then to acceptance of Jesus Christ as a Savior. And that's the thing that saved him. And the last time I saw him, I think he was about 94, 95 years old. But if you get his book, read his story, you will have a great enlightenment. Glenn D. Frazier.
Well, we appreciate you putting that on there. And I'm going to throw on another picture. You got here Sergeant Major Ramos, I believe it is.
Yeah, that's Simon Ramos, Command Sergeant Major Simon Ramos, another great American. But I'm afraid that he's no longer with us. He passed last year at the age of 88. He was actually nominated by the Secretary of the Army, the Chief of Staff of the Army back in the 80s to be the Sergeant Major of the Army. He turned it down, or I should say his wife turned it down. But a good story, yes. So 35 years, if you look up 35 years soldier, Simon Ramos, it tells a story. And a story of a person who come from very humble beginnings. He was born and raised on a farm in Texas, just a stone's throw away from the Mexican border. His parents had obviously were Mexican, had come over through open borders. Of course, back then there was really no really physical barrier to keep people from going back and forth freely across the borders. But yet his brothers also had served 1 and 3rd Army under General Patton, and another brother had jumped into Normandy on D-Day with 101st Airborne Division. He himself had to quit high school and after his father died, and to work to support the family. And in 1952, he decided that digging ditches and what have you was very tough, but he joined the Army, went to basic at Fort Riley, Kansas, had a brown suit on, was on KP because they hadn't been issued uniforms yet. But at that time there, one of his friends had come along and said, "Hey, I got a hot date tonight. Can I borrow your suit?" Well, he gives this brown suit. Last time you ever saw that brown suit. So, and we often joked about that, sharing dinners and breakfast and what have you throughout the years. And he was an avid golfer. But he immediately, after basic training within a month, found himself fighting for his life on several notable battlefields, one of which was Pork Chop Hill and the Battle of Old Baldy, and in which there was a Columbia unit from Columbia that they had fallen asleep somewhat, of course, pitched battles back and forth. And the North Koreans and Chinese had actually killed every person in that Colombian unit. And of his battalion on Old Baldy, he was one of the 87 people who walked off the hill out of his entire battalion. So he was also wounded in Korea. And then later on, he was 23 years old. So he had finished Korean War at the age of 23 as a sergeant first class. And so,
wow.
Yeah, his story explains it all if you go read 35 Years a Soldier. But just to sum it up a little bit, Simon was also in the Vietnam War, and he was actually one of the first series of we call it Special Forces Green Beret. And so he got wounded again in Vietnam. Of course, he fought in some sort of clandestine operations, Cambodia, Laos, and other places that they weren't supposed to have been there. And, and of course, later culminated as the COSCOM Sergeant Major and the Division Sergeant Major for the 2nd Infantry Division, of which he was Sergeant Major for, and then being nominated to be the Sergeant Major of the Army. He turned it down. But he was an avid golfer. He was a devout Catholic, married to his wife of 63 years, who died a few years before his death. But all of his kids were very successful. I think 4 sons that all became Army officers. And of course, he had one daughter, which is the youngest. But he was a great American, one I love very much and just learned a lot from. So that's why you see a veteran. You may see an older veteran or a younger veteran, don't make a difference. They all have a unique story about themselves. So I would ask anyone, if you see a veteran, we usually wear those little hats. I didn't bring my black cap. If you recognize a veteran, go introduce yourself. Say hi. You'll have a lot to learn.
Yeah, no doubt. That's great, Ira. That's some awesome information. 2 things I want to add to that real quick. Number one is I teach my students, I have for years, that if you see a veteran, they always seem to have a hat on, which is great. I always tell them thank you for their service, and it's always amazing. That's almost 9 out of 10 always say no, thank you, and they're thanking us for just acknowledging them, and that's all they ever want. Back to the original thing that you spoke about with the first gentleman in the picture, the hometown that Ian and I grew up in, Pittsburgh, Texas, has a gentleman that was also in the Bataan Death March, and he came to the school when I was in middle school. And actually spoke to our class because I'd worked one summer with his son, which owned McAllister Fencing. But Mr. McAllister also in was in the Bataan Death March and made it out and had some incredible stories, I remember. But I mean, I think what we always talk about this generation, I'm so glad that generation was the one that was at that time and not this generation, because I think we'd have such a different outcome if we had this generation having to go through what that generation did for us. So yeah, great stories, Art. Thanks so much for sharing those.
Well, and I want to chime in here is the first individual, he had a Purple Heart, he had a Bronze Star, and I saw he had an MSM. And then, of course, he was stacked, And a lot of people don't know this, though, from World War II, they didn't wear the medal, his amount of ribbons and medals that we have today. We didn't have it was rare to see somebody stacked like he was for that time, to be quite frank. The second thing on Sergeant Major Ramos, I'm partial to those COSCOM Sergeant Majors, being a former ESC Sergeant Major, which for you, John Brent, that's what a COSCOM moved over to being an ESC. So I have some partiality to him all along, just off that there. But to be recommended to be the Sergeant Major of the Army, that's you can't get much better than that, to be quite honest. That's awesome. And I'm glad he listened to his wife, to be quite frank. So I'm going to throw it over to the coach because he's going to start us out tonight.
Well, one of the things that we used to hear just a couple years ago when President Trump was in office was the crisis at the border and how terrible it was, of the cages of Trump, and the way that building this wall was such a racist issue. So one of the things that we want to talk about this week is immigration even a priority for this new Biden administration, or is it just pushing a divisive race agenda? And that's something that it depends on which side of the political spectrum that you're on. It might be your answer. But if you try to take politics out of it, if we can, which is not always easy, and just ask the question, is immigration a priority for this administration? Or they're just going to push an agenda that's going to be more divisive, which seems that that's what we have right now. So Ira, I want to throw this out to you first, and tell me what you think.
Well, Coach, I tell you what, I give you the warning order, because on every pirate ship, you have to have a loose cannon in order to have a good sail. So I'll try not to fly off the handle too much, but I'll say this here, that the Biden immigration policy is an immigration policy. Even if there wasn't one, it's still an immigration policy. Whether you look at it in a good connotation or negative connotation, nonetheless, it's still an immigration policy. Well, we look at, first of all, there's kind of a historical perspective, right? U.S. immigration policy has always been, part of, I call it our culture, because we were a nascent nation. We had to grow. How do you grow? You have to bring people in. You look at a couple of things that Ian and I had discussing earlier about the national birth rates. So if you got to have husband and wife, or girlfriend and boyfriend, however you want to get together, I don't think two L's can make an X or an O or what have you, but it takes a man and a woman to produce a child or an offspring. However, let's look at our U.S. immigration, our U.S. birth rate, which I think around 2.1, compared to, let's say, European birth rate, France or Germany. I think there's around 1.8, 1.9. Well, let's look at the Latino population. Let's say, I'm not going to just isolate one, but just say Latino population, humongous birth rate compared to maybe that of the U.S. or that of another country. Let's look at Middle Eastern birth rate in Pakistan, South and Central Asia. Well, they had 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 kids. And you have to look at another thing too, how it relates to marriage. Sometimes there are societies that have multiple marriages, which are going to end up, large numbers of kids. Now, that's a little bit off the rail, but let's try to bring it back some about the Biden immigration policy here. Biden's immigration policy, to what I understand, is a complete reversal of that of the 45th president of the United States. But if we go all the way back from the policies of the U.S. presidents from, let's say, 1946 to present, there are so many different things, and I could probably just run the full gamut of it. Let's look at 1952, the U.S. quota system. This is just a little historical perspective, and please chime in where you need to. Where the Cold War that deepened the U.S. government, it consolidated its immigration and naturalization laws into one comprehensive federal law. It was just a hodgepodge of policies and little bits and pieces of laws that to try to govern people trying to build a nation. And let's see, we got 1952 where a quota system was upheld. We have 1954 where Ian and I had talked briefly too about during the Eisenhower administration, there was a thing called Operation Wetback. Now, that may be offensive to a lot of people, but you look at a number of things. Well, one, we had just fought a big war. So what do you have with a lot of people overseas? They come back, well, they have to get the jobs back in the main industrial areas or that of the agricultural arena. Well, when we take a large swath of people from a nation, well, they want their people back at some time. So it was a huge operation that was undertaken to push the people back from the United States back to Mexico under the agreement, hence the term Operation Wetback. So you got the Hungarian Revolution that happened, the Cuban Exodus, which led to the wet foot, dry foot policy. Now, notice some of the things I'm saying, if you can key in on it. Well, there are certain segments of the society if you kind of narrow down in it, it may sound that have a little racial overtones every now and then. Operation Wetback, the Cuban Exodus, Wet Foot, Dry Foot policy. Let's look at, I don't want to skip over the Bracero program.
Well, Ira, one thing I'll say real quick is
Mhm.
what I'm getting at what you're saying here is throughout time, we've targeted certain countries or certain ethnicities in our recruitment to for immigration itself is the way I'm getting. And whether it be from the Cuban crisis, whether it be from the Hungarian crisis, whether it be from Operation.
That is absolutely correct. I mean, it depends because it ebbed and flowed. You had a problem with the Jews coming over, 1970s, well, kind of late 1960s. You had the Jackson-Vanik Paris trade that assisted Jewish refugees from the Soviet Union, when just a number of things that were happening there with Jewish persecution in the Soviet Union. You had in 1975, you had the Asian, in this case here, the Vietnamese and Cambodian boat people. I don't know if you're my age, you probably remember that. It's just a number of things. I'm just going down the line here, but we had to try to tailor our policies in accordance with what's going on at the time. Now, we understand that there are many different facets that covered it, and I'm not trying to veer away from the original question about the Biden policy as far as is it a priority for this administration? But I think each administration had to conduct an in-depth study of what the previous administration's done in order to tailor their policies accordingly. And one of the statements I have here let me take a moment to read it succinctly. Immigration has been an important element of the U.S. economy and cultural vitality since our country's founding. Our laws are complex, but there's a lot of confusion as to how it works. All right, but they build a policy upon several things. All right, one, family-based immigration. Simple. You want to try to keep families together. There's a reason for it. And you have to have what they call employment-based immigration. You either accomplish that through temporary visa classifications or permanent immigration in this case here. But then the next category is the per country ceilings. So each country had a quota. Now, U.S. policy has always been geared towards a Caucasian persuasion, more the European as opposed to the Africans or countries, or opposed to South Asian or what have you. Then, of course, another category would be the refugees and asylees programs. Then you had a diversity visa program. Again, that simply led that kind of around the 1990 era, where we tried to equal everything, try to get again, I look at it as quotas, but you try to get the right balance. What is the right balance is probably a better question. And
hey, Ira,
yes.
Let me ask you this. Let's go back to the original question, because that information that you is absolutely phenomenal, and it's kind of hard to take it all in for me. But what I want to try to bring us back on a focus, because it's been something that we've talked about on here before, is for this administration, is immigration a priority, or are they just pushing a divisive, racist agenda for politics? Because one of the things I will say that this is a very political situation. And it has been, at least since the Trump, walking down or going down the golden elevators, as I call it, or escalators, sorry. And because, the last 4 or 5 administrations had talked about illegal immigration from South America being a no-no. So it wasn't something new for Trump to say it. It's how he said it. So, but them calling this, and I mean the Democrats over the last 4 years, saying that it's racist what Trump is saying and building the wall and doing what he's doing. The political part of it is kind of what I want to try to focus on is this a priority, or is it just now that he's in office, it's forgotten, and we're just going to push the divisive race thing for votes and politics?
Thank you for getting me back on point. It is a very divisive policy, and it is race-based politics to push an agenda. The agenda in my view, in my opinion, is that the Democrats, by any means necessary, want to get as many people from other countries in here so they can make them voters. How do you do that? You got to villainize and demonize everything else that's not within your agenda. And the Democrats do that very successfully. And well, I looked at, again, I was born here. My whole family that I know was born here for the last 155, 160 years, even before that, probably 170 years. So I am an American by all means. I never hyphenate to become an African American. However, I'm not a useful tool for the Democrats. So therefore, they know they're not going to get my vote. So how do you replace my vote? You import the votes by hook or crook. You get them in here. So it is a focus on the Democrats to bring the people in here to replace those voters that, in my opinion, that they have lost through normal attrition or through their policies, or the people becoming woke and not going the Democrat way.
I do have one quick follow-up, and this is for the vet also. Maybe the vet, you can take this, is why do you believe that the people coming from these South American countries, some of them being socialist countries that I have, I work in a prison that are actually some people in there from socialist countries, and they're like, why in the world would somebody want to come from a socialist country and get in and vote for a Democratic Party that is pushing, a leftist or a socialist agenda? Wouldn't you think they would be opposite of that? So they're getting that voter base from these, that's their agenda, but why are we figuring that to go directly into a Democratic box of check, that's their vote?
Well, Coach, for me, what I say is, and I agree with Ira, is that at the end of the day, with all this here, make sure we mute our mics, but at the end of the day, with all this here is, if you remember back in the Johnson era, Lyndon Baines Johnson said, "Hey, if we get if we give the black population enough carrots, then we'll have them voting for us the rest of our lives." That's what he said. It's not my words; it's his words. And I don't think the Democratic Party has really changed their playbook since that. They just picked a different ethnicity, and so they're targeting this here. Because if they painted Trump to be bad enough that he didn't want immigration, he did some of that on himself. But if they painted him bad enough, then you get the people that comes across the border on this, and as you do, you would think. I think they gave a stat out that 5 out of 6 will vote for the Democratic Party, was the numbers they're figuring out. So every 6 people, 5, they'll get 5 votes. So like Ira says, it'll change the voting dynamics straight up right. That's one. And if you think about this, if you get one of them to do it, you got the whole family coming over because I brought your whole family across. And if you look at what's happened at the border, they marched thousands of miles, but they got brand new white, clean Biden shirts on when they cross the border. So I don't know how that works out. I don't know who's getting that.
So I'm going to throw this to Ira with the answer in a second, but one of the things I wanted to get back to on that was, why are they voting 5 of 6 for that type of agenda? I mean, that's what I want to know.
That is a question that I really don't know the answer to, because if you look at just the Latino population itself, they are overall very devout Catholics. And if you look at even abortion, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but if you look at abortion itself and the Catholic religion, well, I find that with the family values, to include, if you want to link that with the anti-abortion, well, kind of like the Democrats, they impress upon them first destination reporting point. In other words, you're the first person I come into contact with. You're going to get me over here, provide me all these nice things and that I haven't had or haven't earned before. Well, we call it ginning up. You give me all these great things and I get to return the favor to you over time. But after a while, they're like, this is really not me. This is really not the family values. And they tend to change after a while. And one of the reasons why I had put up and talked about Sergeant Major Ramos, a very good friend of mine, devout Catholic, strong family values, no abortion, none of that stuff. But very conservative values and believe in the country and the value of a nation. And so with that, I believe over time that when the people come in, they immigrate here under the auspices of Democrat promises, they eventually change at some point, I think, over time.
Greatness. Hey, Vet, we ran this one long, but this was great. I could talk about this for a whole hour. So you better get on to the next topic, because I tell you what, Ira and I really like this.
Yeah, I think we could talk about this a while, and we really didn't touch on the racism part, and I wanted to touch about that, but I think it's evident that the current administration has made racism as forefront. Anything that happens within 24 hours, they respond to that. But 30 days later, we can't even get the person appointed in charge of the border down to the border and lead by example. So I agree with you, Coach.
Well, it's bad. Even I've been called a racist by people who look like me.
Yeah, I just think that we did talk about this. Is I do believe there's systematic racism, but I think the systematic racism in our country is from a certain party in the media pointed toward police officers and things of that nature, to be quite honest. But that's just me. Okay, so we got to do a commercial break here real quick, and this will be real quick. Hey, come tune to us to coachandvet.com, buy some stuff. This is what puts us on the page. And if you like it, let us know. But we have some things like this right here. So moving along, we're going to cover the next topic. So I'm going to throw it out to Ira here real quick. But so the president came out with the state of, not the State of the Union, but he addressed the joint Congress. And as he did, we just like to know positive and negative. You got any, Ira? And I'll throw it over to the coach after that, and I'll wrap it up at the end of that right there. From the state of, well, not state, but the address to the joint Congress. So go ahead, Ira.
I personally did not want to watch I personally did not want to watch the state of address, if you want to call it that, the president delivered to Congress. I just had to catch up bits and pieces after the fact, but there was nothing of substance that I could take away from it. He talked about more so, I guess, providing more free stuff to everyone, talked about the human infrastructure is what I took away from it. Human infrastructure, invest more in the people, schools, and whatever, as opposed to economy. And what I wanted to hear, probably what everybody wanted to hear, was what are you going to do to fix the problem created by your administration on the border? If he didn't talk for me, if he didn't talk about anything else, he didn't talk about anything. And I showed no interest. And that probably put me in a low information category because I didn't watch it, whereas I would normally watch it, but I would have probably had to call the My Pillow guy and get a pillow because I would have fallen asleep.
Well, Coach, what do you got on this here?
Well, first, this was a very unusual situation because normally you have a full, arena, and I believe we had a select 200 people that got to show up, so that was a little bit different. Everything's different right now. I think some of that's being played to, if you're not doing what you're supposed to do, you can always blame it on something. I'll say the positive thing of it, there was no speech ripped up. I'll say that was probably the positive thing. The family plan is a joke, but one good thing that the Democrats are good at is they're good at naming things to get the public involved. That family plan sounds better than infrastructure bull crap because only 6% of it's for real infrastructure. 94% is a bunch of other things that needs to be in a different bill. So let's call it a family plan. So if you're a Republican or conservative, then you go, I'm against it. Then you're now against families, just like you're against, Black people or Hispanic people if you don't 100% believe in anything that's going on at the moment. And I don't understand why we don't have an infrastructure bill, which that's a bipartisan issue if you just stick to what infrastructure is. And then let's get on to these other things. and have it debated. And if you don't, and if we can't get bipartisan on the other stuff, hey, you got the votes in Congress, go get it anyway. But why put it together to make it into a family plan, which is another stimulus crap that you had before that's not really stimulus. So again, the good thing is Nancy didn't tear up stuff. The bad thing is we're being lied to again.
Well, Coach Ira, so this is what I got. I'll talk the positive and I'll talk the negative. The positive, everyone stood up and clapped when the commander-in-chief walked in. So Joe Biden, my hat off to you. You was able to get your party to appreciate America because they sure didn't know how to do it for the last 4 years. Just saying what it is. And secondly, I agree with the coach. You was able to convince an 80-year-old woman who's the Speaker of the House not to throw a 4-year-old temper tantrum in front of the whole world to see. So with that, my hat's off to you, Joe Biden, because got her under control. And somebody will take that and distort that any which way they want. But the bottom line was, when you act like a 4-year-old, you need to be treated like a 4-year-old. Just saying it like it is. You're a Speaker of the House. You represent America, not your temper tantrums that you throw all the time. So moving along, the negative that I saw out of it, though, was out of 63 minutes, the last 3 minutes was about immigration. He dodged it, completely dodged it, and said, hey, Congress, I know you hadn't passed the immigration bill in the last 30 years because I helped you out on that because I was in the Senate. If you get it across my desk, I'll sign it. Not, I am going to take charge because I am the president of the United States. Maybe take my goat smelling butt down to the border and go check it out, or lead from the front and inspire people maybe, or maybe dispatch my vice president who works for me, who I've appointed in charge of this, and for 30-some days has not followed your directive because apparently she wants to save her career and not be part of that fiasco down there, to be quite honest, is what I'm seeing. And but I do think that she does work for the commander-in-chief. Maybe I missed that memo, but that was the negative, is they blatantly washed that away. We talked about systemic racism in our country and how our Republicans need to come together with us on this. Okay, so pushing that divisive agenda again, but we did not see one bit how he was going to fix the border crisis. In fact, today, you know, he just announced that he's going to increase the quota. So that's the positive and negatives I got. You got anything else, Coach or Ira, on this?
Not really. I think, you know, we all said it. There wasn't a lot of positive. There wasn't a lot of unity for sure. There's a lot of, you know, talking to the base type situation, but not really addressing issues, you know, separately. Kind of throwing everything together was what I saw. But, you know, I think it's time to move on to another, because I tell you what, we can get all frustrated on this guy because this guy here is like, I mean, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs to me sometimes. So anyway, I know we got another ad coming up, so I want you to throw the ad up, 30 seconds real quick.
Here we go. So got some hats for you. We got shirts. We got a little bit of everything. And but stop by thecoachandthevet.com and you can see all our podcasts, see all our write-ups that we do. And you can also go visit our shop and support us there. Appreciate it. Go ahead, Coach.
All right. This is a subject that I discussed with I actually am, I don't know if you know this, Ira, but a lot of people here know that I am an educator at a local state prison. And I actually, my inmates that are in a high school program are 18 to 50-year-old guys that need to get a high school diploma before they come back out in society. One of the things that they brought to my attention late last year was the inequality of income inequality when it comes to the bail situation that we have. And I'm going to give a real quick scenario, and this is one that we came up with. Let's say I'm going to use the vet and I, but let's say the vet and I were riding around in his badass car, and we got a 5-pound brick of marijuana. And my dad happens to be a doctor, and Ian's dad happens to be out of work, construction worker. We get pulled over. They arrest us for intent to distribute, and they charge us with a crime, take us in, and they set our bill at $50,000. My dad has $5,000 to get his son out because he's a doctor, and I go sit on the street. Ian's dad is out of work. He wants to get him out, but he can't. So for the next 3 to 6 to 7 months till there's a trial, I get to keep my job. I get to keep my house, my vehicle. I don't lose my family. And Ian, for the same crime, is going to sit in jail for the next 7 or 8 months just because he can't afford to pay. And what we consider in our Constitution, you're not supposed to have an excessive bail. But if you don't have enough money to pay it, is it considered excessive bail? And so the income inequality that we have is do the same crime, but depending on the amount of money that you have in your bank account or in your family's bank account, you can be on the street tomorrow, or you can be sitting there for months at a time waiting. The last figure I want to give you, Ira, because I want you to hit this, is we watched a documentary last week. 71% of people sitting in county and local jails are there pre-trial because they can't afford bail. What do you think?
Oh, you really are testing the limits of my criminal justice knowledge. And actually, I'm a criminal justice major, so it's been quite a while. But there is not fairness in our judicial bail system. And you mentioned that. And what come to mind while you were talking was about the very rich kid, and I think his mom, the affluenza kid, if you remember, if I said it right. Remember the kid that had escaped to Mexico and, of course, later found? Well, there is a disparity in the differences of bail between people of influence and money, connections, to those without. Me personally, I wouldn't do anything I would hope to get in jail or to be put in pre-trial confinement, but you never know. And I would avoid situations as such. But generally speaking, the average people in population, they're going to run across the police at some point. I think there were something like 22, actually about 2 billion or so police encounters, whether hey, stop and frisk or them check your ID or crime scene or whatever. But people come into contact with police. So people get arrested. They have to post bail, either a signature required, recognizance, or again, I think it's up to the judge to make that call. And maybe the DA to say, hey, we need to post bail because of the seriousness of the crime. But I think there needs to be a bail reform. There are a lot of poor people that are languishing away in jail and who can't meet the bail. And well, it's going to be at the on the dime of the taxpayers to pay for lodging and housing, food, what have you. But again, I think it should be up to the judge, and there needs to be fairness in that from the judicial standpoint, from the prosecutorial standpoint. And I think definitely the politicians need to get in and fix that, and legislate that, and maybe provide some limits, some caps upon it.
Yeah. And Vet, I'm going to throw this over you in just a second, but I want to add a little bit to this. You do know when you get arrested and they say you have the right to remain silent and all that good stuff, you have a right to an attorney. And if you can't afford one, we will provide one for you. I don't know how, a lot of that process starts once you're arraigned and you're put in. They have you fill out indigent paperwork. And if it states that you can't afford an attorney, then they will give you a public defender. But at the same time, they know you're broke and you can't afford a public defender, but they give you a $75,000 bail. So in essence, they already know you don't have enough money, and they're going to give you an excessive bail, knowing that you don't have a job or that you're making $10 an hour. So it's a way to confine you that you are actually losing the right to being innocent until proven guilty, because they're actually putting on to you something they know you can't afford because you've already filled out the paperwork that you don't have enough money. So Vet, what do you think about that?
So I think there's a big gap in there, and but I'm going to talk about Kemp County here in a second. But where we're from, Coach, and is they voted a while back last year to make a bigger jail, put some millions of dollars in there. Of course, Kemp County people don't want to pay those pennies, so that didn't happen. So they're under the problem of when they have too many, they have to send them to another jail system, and they have to pay, or they have to release. So what's crazy is if you do something like the scenario you gave, Coach, in Kemp County, you may very well be released, and it's just because you did it in Kemp County and you didn't do it in Titus County. And so you have a geographical problem and a financial problem with the county, one. Two, you also have the economic problem between the two offenders also. And it can be the luck of the draw where you're at. If you're in a county that has a robust jail system, then you may very well, like you said, sit there for freaking 6 months, all because you make $10 an hour and you don't make $30 an hour, or your family doesn't have money. And I think it puts a weird burden. And I know some states went to any crimes that are under this threshold, or there's no bails, which I don't necessarily agree with that either. But what I do agree, I believe that there should be a system where it affects you economically the same way.
Right.
You
Well,
know,
we have to realize initially what bail is for. Bail is just to say, okay, this is the amount of money that we're going to charge you that you can afford to make sure that you show up at a trial date sometime in the future. It's not to hold you excessively until there's a trial and you can somehow be, what they're doing is they're keeping people in for months and then pressing plea bargains on and say, well, we've got this system stacked up with time and time and time ahead, but if you'll take this plea, we're good. What bail is supposed to be for is for you to show back up at a time. So if you PR'd everybody that wasn't a nonviolent or a murder, and you just said, hey, you have to be here on July the 1st, and then you don't show up on July 1st, you can issue a warrant, put them in jail until there is a trial. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem is that if you have money, any kind of money, and you can get a bail bondsman, then I'm back at work the next day. If you are poor, then you are going to sit there for the same crime that the guy beside you in court is going home for based on your economic system only. And that's not what bail should be about. Bail should be about, this is the amount of money we can charge you or not charge you for you to show up on time for your trial.
All those are very good points. And I tell you, I believe that there probably should be something legislated in, like a scale, if you will, a schedule of bail, according to the types of offenses committed. And part of the problem too that adds to it, take me for instance, I'm using myself as an example. I'm nonviolent, never been in trouble with the law, what have you. Maybe I'm falling into a category, I get arrested, I can't afford bail, even though sometimes I guess they could say, well, your bail is $100,000 or $1,000. So nice maker. I'm responsible for paying, 10% of that up front while the bail bondsman, carries the rest and holds it over my head. But at the same time, as an industry, it is a moneymaker. It's an employer for someone. But now, if I can't make bail and I'm stuck in jail, pretrial detention for months at a time, I can become institutionalized. I can learn the ways of crime, and then, I can now become part of that recidivist society, just in and out of jail because I've learned the skills to be a criminal. And that could be part of the problem too that poses, but in that excessive bail can exacerbate.
Yeah, real quick, Bet, before I ask you one more question on this is, you're not only talking about you can be institutionalized, and believe me, I'm in the state jail all the time. People have been in there. It doesn't take long for you to lose everything. And that's the thing, is not only are you being institutionalized, but just because you committed a crime, and I'm not saying, some people just say, well, don't commit a crime. Well, it happens. But if you do commit a crime, you're innocent until proven guilty. And while you're innocent, you should be protected, as it states in the Bill of Rights, to not only excessive bail, but also that you should be able to not lose your livelihood. And what we're doing is we're taking people's jobs, because you're going to get fired. You're going to lose your apartment. You're going to lose your truck or car. You're probably going to lose your marriage if you are married. Also, your children then are going to suffer because they're not having the support of the father emotionally and financially, all because you can't come up with a certain amount of money. Which is worse? We're going to institutionalize and take people out of their family unit, or they can't come up with $5,000. And so it's a big deal, Vet. I think we got to, I actually, to be honest with you, and I haven't said this to you, but I actually contacted Cole Hefner and gave him some information about what I believe about the bail system here in Texas. And he actually said he was going to look into it and get back to me. I don't know if he will, but I think I felt like I had to do something.
Yeah. So, Coach, I will say for heinous crimes, me personally, I don't know if there should be bail for certain heinous crimes.
Yeah, no bail. There's such a no bail situation. If you got a rape or a violent crime or a murder, you need bail. Now,
and I will say also is for low hanging fruit crimes, I'm like, why are we even dealing with that? To be honest, is to put that extra burden on there. Let's just get to it and solve it. And things that were crimes when you and I were younger, I listened to the police department and go, we see somebody with marijuana, we're like, just put the crap out and move on. so those things are not as high a priority as they used to be in certain instances. They're more focused on the hard stuff and things of that nature, from my understanding. I can't vouch for the police department, but
yeah.
Go ahead, Ira.
On that point, here in the Atlanta area, pretty much, although marijuana use is still a federal offense, they pretty much decriminalized it here in the Atlanta area. They won't even stop. You can walk, have a conversation with the police, smoking one, and they're just like, whatever, it stinks, get out of my face with it. But I tell you, as a low crime criminal, if I'm in jail for 1 minute, I got to hit the biggest person in there just to prove my point. Because so I'm going to have more time tacked onto my pretrial confinement, and probably. So,
well,
but yes,
I would like to finish. I want to finish this up by just saying this has been a very touchy subject with the inmates. I actually teach a pre-law class. It's called Principles of Law in the prison system. And when we talk about this situation, this is almost every single person in there was confined for months, waiting for a trial date or a plea deal that was finally given to them only because of money. And they all lost significantly things like I talk about jobs and things like that, that you and I wouldn't lose because we have money. And that's not the way the judicial system is not supposed to be. Well, if you're OJ, you can get a dream team, and you and I don't get a dream team, even though that does happen from time to time. But on a day-to-day basis, bail should be set maybe based on, and this is one we came up with last week, and I think you'll like this because you said something earlier about a scale, is if you make $50,000 a year, maybe there should be a percentage for each crime based on that. And if you make $20,000 a year, or if you make $300,000 a year, based on a percentage that it's equal across the board, than just saying, okay, no matter if you make 20 grand or 250 grand, if you have a 5-pound brick of marijuana, it's 75,000 across the board.
That's correct. The ability to pay, and I think that's oftentimes what a lot of the court systems or the bail systems want. They want to confine you or post or assign a bill to you based upon your ability to pay. So if you come in and say you're indigent, well, we aren't really focused on you as much. So you can just have to sit there and be warehoused until we actually get to you, which, of course, the COVID has impacted a lot too. So with the many thousands and thousands of cases they're behind now, it's going to take a long time to clear that pipeline.
Hey, I would like to say this, Vet, before we move on. I'd like to have Ira on again because I love the way this guy thinks. There's another thing that I'd like to talk about is the way that the system is set up for defense attorneys that are set up from the state give you. If you can't afford one, they give you your own attorney. That attorney is getting paid a certain amount of money that's very small. So they're only going to give a certain amount of time to that defendant. That if you're paying for that same attorney on the outside, you're paying maybe 10 or 15 times that amount, and he gives you so much more time. So again, just because of your economic situation, your public defender that you're getting is not going to give you the type of defense that's needed as you would if you had enough money to pay for one.
Yeah, so there's a saying I've heard, and I don't like falling down those rabbit holes with it, but I think it's a pretty accurate saying, though, is, if you do a crime, it depends on how much of a lawyer you can afford, what will happen to you. And, and they say, rich people don't get away with things. Our question is would Mark Cuban sit in jail for a long time?
Well, last thing I'll say on this is this. We had the richest man in America at the time in 1976 by the name of T. Cullen Davis out of Fort Worth, Texas, that was charged with murdering 2 people. And he had $6 million that he spent on his defense. And when they interviewed him about 20 years later, because he was not guilty twice, he said, I had enough money to pay to be found not guilty.
Wow, that's crazy, Coach. That's crazy. So, hey, we wrap this up fast. We start out slow. So, but before we do, Ira's got a few things that we're going to, he's got 2 more pictures we're going to talk about, and it brings some context in a few things. So I'm going to throw the first one up here, Ira.
That's a picture of my father, who was a Metro policeman in Washington, D.C., 1959, 1960 circa. And with all of the violence that's been heaped upon and disrespect that's been heaped upon our police departments and our policemen and law enforcement in general, and I think the population is somewhere around 880,000 total in the United States. It's unfair to take one bad apple, because in any organization, in every organization, you're going to have one thing that's bad, and it's going to highlight for everybody, and it's just not fair. And in front of my yard, I have some flags I put up. One of which is Police Lives Matter, and it's been prominently displayed there for I think 6 or 7 months now, and it'll be there until it starts to tatter now or replace it later. But when I look at people who are disrespecting the police and just, well, I think about my father. My father, and Ian and I had talked about, my father come from a military background, very well educated man, just a number of things, but never woke up and says, I'm gonna go out there and mess someone's day up, or I'm gonna go out there and just do whatever. He went out there to serve and protect people with honor and stuff like that. And I tell you, it burns my heart when I see the police are being vilified when they're out there every day. My background is in criminal justice, and let me tell you, the time I done my internship with the Laurinburg Police Department, I tell you like this here, I grew up with him. The sheriff of my county, he and I grew up together. He's a retired Marine, and of course, been a retired state patrolman. He's the sheriff of my county, the police chief of my city, play football. A lot of the officers and the senior sergeants on the police force I grew up with. Of course, they're starting to retire out now, and then the younger guys probably rode a bus. I used to drive a school bus in North Carolina at 16 and a half. So what I'm saying is kind of a lifetime of public service, but an appreciation for people who put themselves in harm's way. We started out with military, showing honor and respect to those in the uniform. I back the blue. And I tell you, as Americans, we need our police to establish and maintain law and order, because the alternative is that someone busting on my house, well, I'm going to have to show you law and order from a few NATO numbers.
Amen, brother.
So that's all I got to say about that. I love the police. I'll always protect them, and it's a civic duty to help them out where possible and necessary.
Oh, so Coach, I think we had a good segment tonight, and we got a good aspect here. And we two things I want to talk about real quick is we had Stephanie is supposed to be on. She had some other conflicts that she had to back out, but we'll get her on there later. That's one. And our good friend Casey Luke, who was on here a few weeks ago, is going to Haiti. It all got taken care of. They leave here in about another couple of weeks. And so we'll get pictures of that on that trip there. And we just really want to thank you for coming on and helping us out. And we had really enjoyed it, your insight and everything for all that you brought it to us tonight. So go ahead, Coach.
Yeah, I want to say thanks, Ira, so much. I enjoyed the conversation. I love hearing the perspective of different people from different parts of the country and different parts of the world, and even a different perspective just because, you being an American, but different color than me. I like that you don't use the word African American. I don't use European American, and some people do that and some don't. But I think your perspective and the way you handle yourself, it makes the conversation better across the board for everybody. And I think that's what we need. We need more conversation. We need more debates. We need more understanding. We need more handshakes. And I think that's what this kind of place, this kind of, dialogue, that's the place for it.
Exactly. Well stated. Remember I said earlier, I like to be the pirate, the loose cannon on that pirate ship. It's more fun.
Like pirates.
So we both came from Pittsburgh High School, which is the Pittsburgh Pirates down here. I don't know what we were pirating back in the day. We got some lakes, but that's about it. I bet.
I was pirating Motley Crue CDs. That's what I was pirating.
Yeah.
Well, I'll try not to put blue paint on and the white thing, because my high school, the Fighting Scots, Scotland High School.
Oh, wow. All right. So we're going to end it here, and I'm going to say from the coach. You're on mute, Coach.
Yeah, we're going to do it twice. To the vet.
Stay tuned.